Hey, good afternoon. It's Brenda Meller bringing you back for another slice of social media pie. It is July 29th, guys, and I'm very excited because I've got a very special guest on with me today, Erich Kurschat. And Erich, you and I talked, it feels like a long, long time ago. It's probably a month or so ago, right?
Right. Not
Yeah.
too long ago at all.
Yeah, but in this day and age of COVID, it feels like in some aspects time is standing still, and then time is also going at such a fast pace. But at any rate, Erich, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I'm concerned, though, your audience, in seeing my headshot, may think that you have an imposter who's joined you for this.
Is this new? The beard? Is this not something you normally have?
It's not normally, but it is my quarantine project. I think we all need something to keep ourselves busy these days, and for me, it's facial hair. So, I mean,
Yeah.
take it for what it is.
Awesome. And it was funny, guys. So before we came on live, Erich and I, we kind of hang out in the green room. We chat for a few minutes. And I was seeing Erich on the camera and I saw the white and I was like, does he have a face mask? Is he going to be like funny coming on camera with a face mask on him? And then I showed the video. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a beard. And do you normally have facial hair? Is this something new or?
It's not quite the significant. It usually looks more like my headshot, but these days,
Okay.
it's a bit much when
Yeah.
I'm doing something like this, and I make sure not to wear red to go with the whole Santa Claus theme. So
You may have a side job there, Erich. That's not a bad idea.
we'll see how long it gets.
Well, at any rate, we're going to get the conversation started here in just a few minutes, guys. And we're actually going to be talking about being an introvert. And Erich is going to share some common misconceptions and some actionable tips for any of you who might be watching. And if you're an introvert, we're going to get you into the conversation. Before we do so, I want to just welcome anybody who's watching us, whether you're watching on LinkedIn Live, you're watching on Facebook Live. You might be watching this later on in the day on one of those networks or on YouTube on another network at a later date. But we want to invite you, I should say, to please leave a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. I'm in Metro Detroit in my home office. Erich, where are you at? What part of the world are you in?
I'm in the South Loop of Chicago, so not too far, but at least one time zone away.
One time zone away to the west of me over here. And how's the weather out in Chicago today? What are things like out there?
It looks nice and sunny. I have a window right here. It looks gorgeous, but these days I don't get out as often as I should, so I'm overdue for a trip to my balcony, I think.
Are you in the city, in the downtown area, or how close do you live?
Just south of the city. The South Loop is just immediately south of the Loop, which is sort of the downtown area. So I can go out on my balcony, get a sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
Usually I open it up and I'm like, nope, need to stay in the air conditioning.
Yeah.
Come right back inside and wait for it to cool down a little bit before I venture out.
Yeah, it's been so hot. I think we're both being hit by that Midwest heat wave that's going. I mean, it's summer, so it is what it is. In 4 or 5 months, we'll complain about the winter and the bitter cold, right? And we'll miss these days.
Painting is a hobby of mine. I admit to it, and I have to curb it sometimes.
Well, you said you're staying in your office. Are you getting out at all, like walks and going to the parks and stuff like that, or is it kind of COVID that's keeping you inside, or is it the work and the heat and?
Yeah, it's a little of all of the above. I think Chicago summers can be a little oppressive, but my wife and I have this stand on the way out of our condo, and it has a selection of masks and it has sanitizers, and
nice.
We're very particular about throwing one on, going out for a walk. I think especially in Chicago and probably other metro areas around the country, you're going to be coming within 6 feet of folks, and so we try to plan for that, and then just kind of roll with it. But I think it is so important to be able to get out. For us, it's to walk along Lake Michigan if we can, or get around the neighborhood. So it's not just us sitting, staring at each other and twiddling our thumbs all the time.
4 walls can drive you insane, can't they? Yeah. So awesome. So we're going to get the conversation started about being an introvert in just a few minutes. But what I'd like to do, Erich, is if we could first, let's hear a little bit about you. And I met you actually from Tina Marie Woolfield. I don't know if she's on here yet. I'm looking in comments to see if she's on here yet. Hey, there she is. So Tina Marie, I think she had a conversation with you. I think you crossed paths through your HR background. Is that right?
We did. I mean, we realized that we were up to similar pursuits. Her with her HR Unite community, and me with my HR Hot Seat community, and we ended up on a panel together, and we became fast friends. And the fact that she is preloaded as a graphic for you means that you two must be pretty tight as well.
Yeah, she and I, we actually both live in Fraser, Michigan, which is a very, very tiny a city in Macomb County. It's like about a half hour northeast of Detroit. And we just so happen, to live in the same community. We cross paths a lot. We support each other online. And she said, I think she did an email introduction. She's like, Eric and Brenda, you guys got to meet. And usually it's like I get those introduction emails. I'm like, yeah, thanks. But, when Tina Marie introduces you to someone, I'm like, okay, I'll reach out. And we set up a phone call, and we had a great chat. And I think during that phone call, you said, hey, how about you come on my podcast? And I said, great, let's do that. And I said, how about you come on LinkedIn Live with me as well? And I'm going to include, guys, the podcast link from Eric's show. I'll include it in the comments a little bit later on here today. But what I'd like to do, Eric, is why don't you take a few minutes, introduce yourself. Who are you? What's your business, Harmony Insights, all about? And then we'll get into the conversation about introverts.
Great. Yeah. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights, LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. Awesome. And so I am a self-proclaimed DISC nerd. I've been working with it since 2006, I think, and just love working with organizations and teams to help them communicate more effectively with each other and their respective audiences by better understanding their natural communication styles and what others may need from them. So those conversations can get pretty deep. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, which is an inclusive mastermind community of, as we say, real HR pros solving real HR problems. And it's a mastermind style conversation, entirely free to attend, these days entirely virtual. We have 10 different chapters around the country and over 2,600 members.
That's great. And this is something you created yourself? This Hot Seat?
I did. And Brenda, as an introvert myself, I thought, it makes me a little nervous, but if I can get 10 to 12 HR professionals together on a regular basis for meaningful conversation, we'll see what that turns into.
Right.
Well, it turned into 2,600.
Wow. Yeah. So how long has this been going for you? I mean, when was the first time you did a meetup and kind of from where we are today?
We are now, coming up this month, celebrating our 4th birthday.
Oh, so wow.
Our first official meetup was, I believe, in August of 2016, and we've been going ever since. And people are coming out of the woodwork for it and bringing colleagues. And I think people are craving a more meaningful networking environment. They're not finding it in some other places, and coming to us and saying, I finally feel like I belong somewhere as an HR professional. And I love that.
That's great. And have you shifted everything? I'm going to ask the question from both your business perspective and then the HR community perspective. Have you shifted everything virtual now? Are you doing everything virtually?
Yes. So DISC, certainly everything is being done virtual. No one's going to need to show up and bring a whole team together in their office space.
Yeah.
I think for good reason. So we've shifted to virtual facilitation, which is easily done because the assessment is also virtual.
Yeah.
HR Hot Seat, I paused for about 5 minutes and I saw other organizations kind of saying, oh, we're going to put the brakes on and reschedule. And I thought, at the time when people need meaningful connection the most, the worst thing that I could do is jump in the back seat and say, well, we'll check back in with you in the fall.
Right.
And it was clunky at first, and we didn't know what we were doing, and we had to figure out some online video conferencing technology. But it was so important to me and the other chapter leads around the country that we showed up and we said, this is going to be a little clunky at first, but we'd rather be here and give you this space for meaningful, confidential connection than to disappear. And
that's great. So are you doing these through Zoom now, or what's your preferred platform that you're using?
Primarily on Zoom. It's kind of a mixed bag. That's the place that people I think are most familiar with, but it's also the place that people are most familiar with, and they might like something different. So we've dabbled a little bit. I've tried different platforms, and I'm happy to chat with anybody who wants to learn about what I've learned. But I find we keep coming back to Zoom because it is so user-friendly.
Yeah, it's like so widespread, and I kind of feel like I was one of the people who was using Zoom before it was cool, and you probably can relate to this because when you're independent, you don't have access to the WebEx platform. I mean, I remember using enterprise platforms through WebEx and GoToMeeting and all those other, and it was like huge, number of seats because we were doing large webinars and things like that. And now as an independent consultant, it's like you're managing your budget, you're looking at the best solutions you can get for the lowest cost. And I used the free Zoom version until I had to, I think there's a 40-minute limit, and I kept doing 1-hour sessions and they would end. And I'm like, well, I got to upgrade. But we had a little bit of a running start, I think, Eric, because you and I were using the platform before it became cool, right?
Yeah, and I would never, by any stretch of the imagination, label myself as an early adopter of much.
Yeah.
I like to do my research and figure out if it's something I want. By then, people have been using it for 5 years.
Yeah.
But I think early on, I thought, okay, Zoom really has some functionality that's going to be useful. There are a couple of things that I feel are lacking, but for the most part, I think there's a good reason why it's so popular.
Right. Awesome. Well, let's jump into the conversation here. We've got a lot of folks that are kind of waiting, and I'm really looking forward to this topic. So when I asked Eric to be on the show, I said, pick anything you want to talk about. I look for inspirational, educational, or informative type of topics. And and he said, hey, let's talk about my experience being an introvert and common misconceptions and actionable tips. And I'm like, you're not an introvert, Eric. I'm like, there's no way. I mean, after having a phone conversation with you, and I'm like, there's no way I'm like, I'm an introvert, but you're clearly an extrovert. And you're like, no, I am. But I think, you can't always tell people from being that. So tell us a little bit about your background. Why is this topic something that you're passionate about? And then let's jump into the conversation here.
Brenda, I'll tell you, I have even family members who disagree adamantly with me that say there's no way you are introverted. And then I'll say, well, that's curious. And why? And oftentimes their reasoning is a misconception of what introverts are and sort of how we're wired and what our preferences are. And I'll say there are some times where I can certainly turn it on and I can adapt and I can bring the energy that I need to bring. And it's always a genuine passion for whatever my subject happens to be. Today, it happens to be networking as an introvert.
Yeah.
But that can be misleading. Like, you have to stick around with me when we hit stop, Let's
talk about this, because what is an introvert? I mean, sometimes people think, oh, an introvert is somebody who's really, really painfully shy, quiet, reserved, not outgoing. Is that true?
So that's one of the common misconceptions, is that it has anything to do with shyness or some sort of social abnormality. Yeah. I think introverts are labeled as closet dwellers, that we'd rather hide from the sun and from people. And that's where we feel most like ourselves. And I certainly, my big disclaimer off the bat, and by the way, introverts often come with disclaimers, is that I don't speak for all introverts. I can only speak for myself and the research and the studying that I've done. But Susan Cain herself, who is sort of the foremost expert and speaker on the topic of introversion, Susan Cain has said recently on a podcast with Adam Grant, I think it's called I'm going to mess it up, but it's a podcast.
Maybe somebody listening could drop a comment below, because there's probably somebody who knows what you're talking about. So
yeah, it was just on the tip of my tongue, but I don't know. She said, there's this misconception that introverts don't want to connect and they don't want to be social. And she said, I don't think enough attention is paid to what type of connection and how much. She said, if you expect that an introvert is going to be the person that's comfortable in the spotlight, center stage, surrounded by people as the center of attention, that may not necessarily be the case. That the introvert is going to be the person that says, no, I still want to connect meaningfully with you, but I'd rather do it one-on-one. I'd love for our conversation to be one where I can really focus on you specifically, what you're saying. I want to be able to hear you, and I don't want there to be all this extraneous noise, this extraneous energy. And so that comes, that's one of the ways to distinguish between the two. And this is something I learned only recently, is there are physiological underpinnings to these differences, where the introvert is somebody who physiologically is more easily stimulated. So introverts are often looking to avoid that stimulation or downplay it, minimize it in some way. Extroverts physiologically are more easily stimulated or less easily stimulated, and look for that in their environment and in their relationships and conversations.
Interesting.
And I would say, and actually this was only recently on a trip to Yellowstone that my wife and I took. We were listening to a fantastic book. I think it was called Atomic Habits. And it was so interesting. And one of the points that was made when he was talking about personality styles, he said, even as babies in the hospital, a loud noise can be played. The babies who turn away from that loud noise, if followed over time, are often found to be introverts.
Really? That's
and the babies who turn toward that loud noise you know, inspired by or in some other way attracted to that stimulation are often found to be extroverts. And I just thought that was so fascinating.
Wow. So it starts like when we're babies, when we're infants. It's not something that necessarily develops when we're a child. It's something that's probably a part of our DNA all along, right?
I would say most of what I've read is that it's more nature than nurture, but you can't ignore the nurture piece. You know, I think that society rewards and discourages certain behaviors and communication styles, and our culture, whatever culture we are part of and identify with, reinforces and discourages. But from what I've read, so much of the introversion, extroversion, personality style argument is very much caught up in the nature side of things. So
when did you first realize that you were an introvert? Was it when you were a child, or was it when you were older? Or tell us about that.
Well, the label itself came much later, you know, but I think for as long as I can remember, I can think of really valuing time to myself, you know, really wanting time to think and to clarify how I feel about things, and to measure my response and my words before they come out of my head. And I remember just being so nervous, even around people who felt comfortable just saying whatever came to mind, you know, with no filter at all. And these days, I very much admire that personality style and need to be more like that at times. But I think my natural inclination has always been to really be sort of more thoughtful and spend time researching and considering how I feel about a certain topic. I make my position known, and in a meeting, in a management meeting, for example, in the workplace, spending quite a bit of that time thinking about how I want to respond before I end up responding. And everyone's looking at me like, so Eric, are you going to participate at any point?
Right. You're like, I'm thinking, you know, I'm just going to, but how, I mean, the topic we're talking about today is kind of networking as an introvert. So, and it sounds like what I'm hearing you say. I mean, we're talking about small group interaction and individual interaction, but talk to us a little bit about kind of the networking aspect of it as well.
So it gets really interesting, and I'll say before we go any further, there's really a spectrum. So even the people who originally coined these terms said there's no such thing as 100% introvert or 100% extrovert. That person doesn't exist. So we are all introverted to some extent. We either identify with being closer to one end or the other. And I think it really does make itself known when we think about professional networking. I will say right off the bat, that's something that, regardless of personality style, so many people shy away from. I've put out on social media, you know, what words come to mind when you think of professional networking? And I, you know, the whole gamut. And one of the times I remember asking, you know, what would you rather do than professionally network? Like, get with this. And a woman said, you know, I'd rather be stuck in traffic in Chicago when there's construction and it's raining and the Cubs are playing.
Oh my gosh, like the trifecta of like all these things. Wow.
That's sort of the visceral response that people have to professional networking to begin with, which leads me to believe that, okay, we need to have a real meaningful conversation about what professional networking is. But I have found that people, especially those who are identifying with being introverted, bring a special dislike of professional networking. And so I'm very interested in talking through why that is, and what is their perspective on who they are and how they do it and how other people do it, and how can we adjust that perspective in some way so that people really embrace, regardless of personality style, embrace the natural strengths that they bring to professional networking, that they anticipate those times when something may get in their way, that they may get in their own way, and learn how to manage that, and learn how to really excel in the way that you would excel and you would prosper and you would shine, as opposed to the way that somebody else might.
Yeah, and like, I liked your point earlier too about this is a spectrum. You're not 100% introvert, 100% extrovert, and there's probably, I mean, I imagine almost like situational as well, meaning like if I walk into a group of people, you know, whether it's the HR hot seat and I know everybody, or HR Unite and I know everybody, it's different than if I walk into a large room and I know nobody and everybody seems like they know others and I'm having to approach them in that situation. Would you agree with that? It's somewhat situational?
Exactly right. And that's actually consistent with the work that I do with the DISC personality assessment, DISC says that you can choose your behavior, and the behavior that you choose will be appropriate for the environment in which you find yourself in the conversation and relationship. And there may be somebody you don't know well, and you sort of keep your distance from in some way, and other people that you do know well, and you take to them, and you would be perceived as extroverted, even as an introvert, just because you're so comfortable in those relationships and in that environment. And like I was saying before, you can watch me or view either of us in this conversation and come to your own conclusions. But if you're with me when we hit stop and turn off the cameras and I have to go to the couch and recharge for 5 minutes, that's when you really get to know who people are. It's who they are off stage. And those natural behaviors really give you a sense of what people's natural preferences are.
And for me, I kind of think about it as a recharging. How do you recharge? For me, I recharge by going for a walk in the morning by myself with my headphones on, not talking to anybody. Similar to you, after we're done here, I'll shut off the lights. I'll probably go sit outside, have a glass of lemonade, and just not talk to anybody. I mean, I'll check in on my family. How's everybody doing? And then I'll go outside. And that's it. Like, don't talk to me for 30 minutes. I need to it's not even a decompress. It's like recharge. I need just the quiet space in my mind. And I think for me, once I came to that conclusion, I'm like, oh, this isn't a bad thing. This is just how I recharge, versus other people may feel like, especially we're in COVID and we're all kind of locked down in our own homes. And I'm like, I don't know about you, Eric. I'm like, this is okay. I don't mind. I can connect with people virtually like this. There's not that pressure of going out sometimes into the groups and networking. And I do miss it, but I'm not struggling with it. And I feel like probably the extroverts, if you're watching right now, you might be really struggling with that. So what are your thoughts on, we've shifted from a networking in person to now networking online. What tips do you have for folks that are watching that are maybe introverts and they're still struggling with this networking, even though it is virtual now?
One of my favorite memes that I've ever seen is introverts unite, just separately and in your own home.
I love it.
And so in that sense, I think what we're doing now really very naturally appeals to people who are introverted. The fact that you and I can have this conversation, and it gets nuanced. I mean, just the fact that a lot of people are using, they have different setups, and their camera may be in one place, but their screen may be in another. And so you, for example, if you weren't looking into your camera, which as I see it would be looking directly into my eyes, which would be nervous on occasion, right? Holding that eye contact. Eye on your screen was sort of misplaced a little bit, and so you were looking off to the side.
Yeah, I'm navigating. I feel like the co-pilot. I've got like all the buttons and things in StreamYard. I'm trying to keep things going. But I don't know about you, Eric. It's hard to train yourself to look at the camera because you're not making eye contact with a person.
Exactly.
You're looking at an inanimate object, and it's an eye, but it's staring back at you. But there's no interaction. And you prefer, going back to the babies analogy, babies prefer to look at human faces, and we as human beings prefer to look at human faces. But when you're on a Zoom call or a StreamYard like we're on today, and I'm pointing at, I gotta like look at the camera. I gotta train myself. Do you struggle with that too, or is it fairly easy for you to remember to look at the camera?
No, I do. As it is now, I've aligned you up so that you're immediately below my camera. I insist on looking at you because that's where the connection is. If I'm looking at a green light, I feel not only disconnected, but I feel nervous. And so as I was saying before, like where you have me positioned, I may be off to the side where you're looking at me, but as I see you, we don't have that eye contact. As an introvert, that actually becomes easier for me to have a conversation with you because you're looking slightly in a different direction. So you have these nuances now in terms of how people are set up and how they're looking or not looking at their camera that really impact the connection you're making with people. Some people might be put off by that, if I don't perceive you as looking directly at me, and other people might say, that it's a little bit easier for me to have a conversation because I don't have to hold eye contact in that same way. What gets tricky then is you jump on a Zoom call, and this is unlike real life. You're sitting in a room, you're seeing the backs of heads, you're seeing the sides of heads, you're seeing usually one who's kind of facilitating or speaking with you. Now you're on Zoom and you see potentially up to 49 people who are all seem to be staring at you.
Right.
Not, of course, they're looking at themselves and other people, but it can be really disconcerting. And I think when we talk about some of this, you don't even have to be introverted to be put off by it. You know, any
Yeah.
personality style may say at the end of a long day on Zoom, I'm done.
Yeah, you Zoom fatigued yourself out at that point. And you know, in the beginning, it's like people were, when they were on Zoom, they're like, can you turn your video on so we can see you? And I think now people are realizing people just don't want to be on camera when you're taking a sip of water, you know, or you're wiping your nose. Because to your earlier point, when you're in a conference room or even at a networking event, you're only looking at one person, and you might say,
and you're missing everything, you know.
Right.
You have this Brady Bunch style setup.
Yeah.
Where I've seen the Muppet Show too.
The Muppet Show. I was just thinking that I'll see if I can find the graphic and pull it up on screen here.
And you're making the assumption that means everybody that you see is all looking at you. Of course, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But it can be off-putting, certainly.
Yeah, and it can be exhausting because you feel like you have to be like on, like you said, the whole time. Do you use any techniques to help you with that? I mean, do you turn your video off, or do you use backgrounds that distract so people are looking at the background and not you, or what techniques are you using right now?
So I'm using a few, and actually some weren't even intentional off the bat, but I'm realizing now are end up really helpful for those of us who are introverted. Number one, I try to remind myself and others, because I host conversations on Zoom regularly, that they are in complete control over various aspects of their experience.
Okay.
And so I say, you know what, I would prefer for you to leave your camera on, because that's how I can connect more meaningfully with you. But if you need to turn it off, I will respect that. And I think giving people permission and giving yourself permission at the end of a long day on Zoom, maybe you want to squeeze in one more networking event, but you don't want your video on. I think you need to give yourself permission to not have it that way, to not have it on.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, I will say my preference is certainly to keep it on so that I can connect with you that way. Yeah. Number two is help people draw their attention away from the video piece of it by highlighting the fact that there's this chat function. And for those introverts out there who are more comfortable on Twitter, for example, because you're not seen, you're able to interact with people and not necessarily be seen. Look at this chat feature on the side that is going to mimic in some ways, a back and forth on Twitter. And people who are drawn to that, now suddenly they're less concerned about what they look like and who's looking at them. Yeah. They're able to engage with people in this feature that just takes their mind off of being in the spotlight.
I love that tip too, Eric. And I feel like it's almost like the equivalent, like if you and I were in a room together at a networking event and you were across the room, I would walk over to you and say hi, like I would do that. So if you're in a chat or in a Zoom session and you see Eric as one of the 49 people, like I'll private message him and I'll say, hey, Eric, how you doing? And then immediately as you do that, I see Eric is seeing the little notification and you can see him looking down and then you see him smile because he's like, oh, Brenda said hi to me, it's like a diversion technique, but it actually engages with people at the same time. That's brilliant.
Now, you don't want to miss what's going on screen. I mean, there could be something really important happening, but now suddenly I'm less concerned about me, and I have the ability now, and this is so important in terms of the conversations I have with people, introverted and extroverted alike. I have the ability to shine the spotlight on somebody else. And I think that is such an important point. One of the things that I like to say, is that if you're uncomfortable in the spotlight, point it elsewhere. I
love it. If you're uncomfortable in the spotlight, point it elsewhere. That's going to be like a sticker or a social media graphic or something.
Those of us who are often most uncomfortable in the spotlight are the slowest to realize that we control where it's pointed. And so whether you're in an in-person event or you are in a virtual event of any sort, we can call it a networking event, you still have control over where that spotlight is pointed. So in an in-person event, we meet, I know I'm going to be nervous talking about myself, and I feel like you're staring at me. Maybe I have some grilled cheese on the side of my face. I want to say, Brenda, why do you do what you do? Like, tell me about your work. What are you really excited about now? What's something that's stressing you out? Yeah. Thereby putting the spotlight away from me on you, but then making you feel special. One of the things that I like to say is you should treat everybody that you meet as though they have a sign above them that says, make me feel special. And I'm not the first person who said that, certainly, but even in my workshops, I will bring this. I don't know if you can see this, but this.
You actually have, it says, hello, my name is.
My need is to be.
My need is. That's clever.
That's not my need, but if you assume that people need to feel special, they want to feel special, and you make that your goal, now suddenly the spotlight is on them, it's away from you. in an in-person event, that makes it a little bit easier for me as an introvert to warm up and kind of follow your lead. Yeah. In a virtual event, if I'm taken over to the chat area, if I'm just staring at my picture, I assume I'm in the spotlight. I'm uncomfortable with that. If I come into the chat and I say, oh, Brenda's here, or Tina Marie Woolfield is here. Hey, Tina Marie, how are you doing? I just attended your HR Unite conference recently. I saw Brenda speak at it. That was fantastic. Guess what? Spotlight isn't on me anymore. I'm so much more comfortable. I just can't tune out so much that I'm missing whatever's going on, on the stage.
Right.
So I won't belabor the point, but just that creating a diversion for yourself or for others allows yourself or others to shine that spotlight on somebody else and make themselves feel a little bit more comfortable in whatever environment they happen to find themselves.
I love it. And the brilliance of that technique too, Erich, is I feel like we as introverts, I struggled with, being very shy and introverted my entire life until I realized it wasn't a character flaw. It was just a personality description. And I did the whole Toastmasters thing to get comfortable speaking in front of people and whatnot. But I still kind of struggle with that. But, giving ourselves permission and knowing that it's okay. And a lot of the techniques that you're sharing, the creating the diversion, but by doing so, by saying, hey, Erich, what brings you to the event today? It actually makes it look like I'm a very engaged participant. It doesn't make me look like I'm nervous like that. I think that's one of our biggest fears, many people as introverts, is like people can tell how nervous we are, how out of place we feel at an event. So if you use the techniques that Erich is talking about, shine the spotlight on other people, and virtually, if you're feeling like everybody's looking at you on camera, well, shine the spotlight on others by messaging them in chat or just by doing an everyone chat or something. And then if the attention goes over the chat and it's not looking at the camera, it's brilliant. And people are like, wow, this Erich guy is fascinating. He's paying attention. He's adding to the conversation. It's creating that really nice diversion there.
There is a quote that's, I think, often misattributed to Einstein. He may or may not have said it. The jury's still out on that. But it's something to the effect of, everybody's a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's a failure.
Yeah.
And so I think, we see other people networking in a way that we deem to be appropriate and effective. And we think, well, I could never do it like that. I'm not wired that way. And so we take ourselves out of the game instead of saying, that works for that person. What's going to work for me? I, Erich Kurschat, will bring people together for an HR hot seat event, and I'll have 120 people in the room. And Brenda walks up to me and says, hey, we should catch up. I'm going to say, now, wait a minute. In the middle of this room, in the middle of this conversation, I feel uncomfortable. I can't hear her. I'm starting to sweat. I feel like I'm in the spotlight. I'm going to say, Brenda, do you mind if we go into the other room, or can we go back to the corner of the room where I can hear a little
Let's
bit?
go grab a coffee. That's my go-to. Hey, I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm going to go grab a coffee. Do you want to go fill up?
Yeah, right. That's recognizing that the environment in which I find myself may not be most conducive to networking in the way that I want to.
Right.
So how am I going to show up as authentic and genuine as I can be and really put my best foot forward? And maybe it's just moving to a different room or asking permission to network in a slightly different way. Or it's, showing up and giving myself permission to define success as having one conversation. I don't need to return 50 business cards. If I spend 10 minutes together, my work is done. Odds are that 10 minutes is going to lead to another 10 minutes or to a second conversation. I'm going to be glad I was there. But the person who showed up scoping the room out for an escape route now is suddenly happy to be there and finding the experience enjoyable and fruitful because I've identified what objective is realistic for me. Having one conversation, I don't need to have 10, but if I have one and it lasts 10 minutes, I've done what I've shown up to do, and that is sufficient, and that is okay. And I'm not deficient in some way because I would rather go home and land back on my couch and turn on whatever the kids are watching these days.
Yeah, there you go. No, it's a really great tip. And giving yourself permission and knowing you don't have to be coming back with 12 or 14 or 25 new contacts in the pre-COVID world. And eventually we'll be post-COVID. We'll be back there in person again. But even in a virtual networking, it's you don't need to connect with all 49 of those people. But maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 people that you have had some meaningful chats with that you continue to network with online or through phone conversations or through LinkedIn. Really good point. So Erich, I'm looking at the clock. I feel like we could keep talking about this forever, but I do want to get to shifting the conversation to inviting the audience to participate. If that's okay with you, we'll kind of shift there next.
Of course, let's do it.
So I just put up on the screen a little bit ago, and there's about a 30-second delay from the time that you leave a comment to the time that we can actually see it in the comment section. But I'm curious, for those of you that are watching today, do you have any questions for Erich, or do you have any tips as a fellow introvert for virtual networking techniques that you found that are useful? And I see one question that came in from Tom Daniels. We're gonna do a little bit of a Wilson here, Erich. I'm gonna pull us up a little bit later. But anything comes up in your research concerning opposites attract introverts and extroverts? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Tom, that's a great question. I mean, that really aligns with the work that I do with DISC as well. And you can talk about opposites in a professional term. You could talk about it in a personal sense as well. Is that oftentimes you find that, at least in personal relationships, that as long as two people share values and share morals and ethics, those sorts of things, that opposite personalities really do attract. That's the spice of a relationship, is that you end up with somebody as a life partner that brings something very different in terms of their personality style. Mm-hmm. Some people that's very attractive. For other people, they think, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly be with somebody who's so different in so many ways.
Yeah.
You know, as much as I like to think that spending the rest of my life with somebody, or even a professional networking conversation with somebody who's just like I am in all ways, would be fantastic. When I find somebody like that, I'm driven nuts, because there are aspects of me and who I am that I'm blind to.
Yeah.
But then when I see them in somebody else, I think, oh my gosh, I do that exact same thing, and it drives me nuts, right? So I think that, you know, there's no right or wrong answer here. Some people are drawn to same, and some people are drawn to opposite. But really digging in and figuring out why you're attracted to the relationships you are, both personally and professionally, that's where it gets interesting, because you learn so much about yourself and other people in the meantime.
That's a really good point. And I even think about, I'm going to pop the next question up on here, but I even think about, sometimes I find, Erich, like when I am connecting with an introvert, like somebody like you, I'm like, it actually energizes me more. Sometimes it's a little bit more exhausting when you're connecting with an extrovert, because they tend to dominate the conversation, or their energy level is just different. And I feel like sometimes I'm actually drawn more to introverts because it helps. But in other times, it's like, I'd rather do the listening and let them do the talking, and you know, it's kind of okay for the extroverts. Kimberly and I think Vicky had, they're kind of having a side conversation here, and you talked about this a little bit earlier too, Erich. You know, thoughtfulness before responding. You know, being in a meeting or you know, maybe even in the virtual session right now. You know, waiting to respond. So you don't. When I put like a comment, I say comment below, ask a question, or add to the conversation. There might be like people who are a little bit more extrovert that are just throwing stuff up on screen right now. And the introverts might be thinking, what question should I ask that's going to add value to the conversation? And then you start to overthink it. Well, wait, does that make me look like I'm shy? I'm uneducated? Does it make me look like I'm silly? Or, you know, I mean, what are your thoughts there on the thoughtfulness approach and kind of pausing before speaking?
Extroverts will say, I speak to think. You know, and introverts will say, I think in order to speak. And there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad about any of it. I certainly admire both sides of that coin. I think the question is, what's appropriate for the conversation that you're in and the environment that you're in currently? You know, if you're sitting in a management meeting and people are looking to you for your opinion because you have some tenure in your organization, you know, your natural inclination may be to give it more thought, do some research, but at some point, you know, people are going to want to know what you have to say. And I think introverts need to give themselves permission to speak before thinking. And even just saying that out loud makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
You know, but my opinion is valuable, and people are going to ask for it on occasion. And it's okay that it isn't as well thought out as it could be. Just contributing to the conversation is going to be so valuable. For extroverts, it's okay to think before speaking. You know, I appreciate that you're going to be so comfortable forthcoming with your thoughts, but maybe there are situations where you really need to consider what's going to come out of your mouth before it leaves it. And no judgment there, but just considering what's going to be appropriate for the environment and the conversation that I'm currently in.
Yeah. And in a virtual sense, I mean, when you say things come out of your mouth, you know, think about it before. And in a live event, you can't pull the words back after you said them. in a virtual, in Zoom, you can't delete chat messages, I don't think, after you put them out. But on a LinkedIn Live, you can put a comment out and then you can delete it or you can go back and edit it. And the same thing with LinkedIn posts and Facebook posts. Twitter, you can't edit, but you can delete them. Yeah. So there are ways that you can kind of modify. Nancy agrees with the thought about self-permission to have she really liked that point, certain number of quality conversations and then go home to recharge, right?
Sure. My wife and I are both on the introverted side, and she comes home from her day being a first grade teacher, and I'm done with my day working with adults, and we sit side by side on the couch and we don't say anything for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And if I'm too quick to ask her about her day or vice versa, something that you would normally want to do to show interest, the other person just shakes their head and they're like, not yet.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's someone on, and I can't see who they are. So this person, I'll look in the comments later. But when we see this gray avatar here, this means the person's privacy settings are probably set to either semi-private or completely private on LinkedIn. So it says LinkedIn user. We can't see who you are. But it looks like they're a part of your HR Hot Seat Detroit chapter. How many chapters do you have, Erich?
We have 10 total, 4 in the Chicago area and then another 6 around the country.
That's great. And so the question, do you think HR is more suited for introverts or extroverts? What do you think?
It's a great question, but it's also a dangerous question. And it makes me think of companies that say, is this position going to be more suited for this personality style or that personality style?
Yeah.
I think you have to allow people to show up with their own motivations. Mm-hmm. And people might think, okay, you have to be a people person to be in HR, for example. You have to be extroverted because if you're, for example, in talent acquisition, you're talking with people all day, I'm going to assume that you want to get some sort of fulfillment out of that. I spent 16 years in corporate HR in a cube on Excel, and people knew not to bother me. And I was in the corner. I chose a cube in the corner of our space because that allowed me to do my best work. And I was working with numbers. And as it turns out, I'm also the introverted that really got fired up getting out of my cube, facilitating disc conversations. That took me completely by surprise.
Yeah.
And had my supervisor or anybody else said, well, Erich is the resident introvert, we're going to give this facilitation role to somebody else, I would have missed out on not only some of the most fulfilling, rewarding work I've ever done, bringing my own motivations to it. It scared the bejesus out of me, but I still wanted badly to do it. I would have missed out on what has now become a small business and a career steeped facilitating large group conversations. Now, at the end of that 3-hour workshop, I'm in the couch. You may invite me out to drinks, and I'm going to say, I appreciate the invitation. I have to go in my car for 20 minutes to recharge. So,
I so appreciate you saying that because I feel like as the same thing as an introvert. When I go to conferences, I love going to conferences and I love networking with people. And I've had the situation where they're like, the conference is done and the planning team, and since you're a speaker, we want to invite you to come out and hang out with us for happy hour. And I'm just like, I just need to not talk to people. And I feel like I should go and hang out because it's the right thing to do from a professional level, networking and, in a smaller group. But to your point, I'm like, I'm actually looking forward to driving home and being in my car and not talking to anybody right now.
It reiterate what we started out saying. It doesn't mean you're shy. It doesn't mean you have a social aversion of any sort. It just means that you recharge in a different way. Never equate introversion with shyness. That's the quickest way to what's the word I'm looking for? To offend someone who's introverted. There are introverts who are shy, there are extroverts who are shy, but introversion does not equal a social abnormality or fear of any sort.
Yeah. No, we're not, it's not that one is better than the other. It's just a differentiation of personality traits and energy charging. Gosh, Erich, this hour is flying by, and I want to start to kind of wrap us up because I know you're busy. You've got to get back to your work day, and I know our viewers do as well. So as we start to wrap the conversation here, I'm going to pull up your website up on screen. Is there anything you'd like to share with us? Any shout outs you'd like to give to people? Anything you're working on right now at Harmony Insights, or any kind of events or podcasts that are coming up that you'd like to promote?
I would like to end after this on something inspiring that I thought of while we were talking. But in the meantime, harmonyinsights.com is a great place to find me. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Harmony Insights is sort of all things DISC and the public speaking and conference speaking that I do. hrhotseat.com is where you can go to find out more about what we do in the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community. Again, all free. and all online these days. And the final thing that I will mention, and I appreciate you soliciting this, is I'm doing lunch dates, as I call them, 30-minute Zoom conversations. You were one of them for me. And they're down to a couple times a week now, but the calendar is filled through the beginning of September. And you can find out about lunch dates that I'm hosting at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. And free to sign up for, and just really inspiring conversation to encourage you to do your best work.
So is that where we could find the playbacks too? Because I'm going to try to find the link and put it in the comments later.
I will say the playbacks are not yet up, so I'm realizing how much goes into the skill set of getting those up on YouTube. And so I'm still working through those, but eventually the video of my previous conversation will be there as well.
Okay, I'm going to drop this on screen right now before we wrap it. I want to pull up your LinkedIn URL here too. So this is harmonyinsights.com lunch dates. Did I get that right?
Yes, and I will say one last thing, Brenda. As you're talking, I had put together, because I speak so often on the topic of networking for introverts, and I often use the hashtag network like an introvert. If you go to harmonyinsights.com/network like an introvert, it's kind of a mouthful there, but harmonyinsights.com/network like an introvert, you will find a number of resources that I have put together to reinforce a lot of the concepts that we've discussed in our time together today.
That is awesome. Look at this. I'm going to pull this a little bit larger. Erich's top 10 networking tips. The Introvert Advantage. You've got The Quiet Book by Susan Cain, The Power of Introverts by Susan Cain, Work Life with Adam Grant, and the site Everything Disc. And as we're talking about this, I meant to ask you this earlier, Erich, and I'm familiar with, and there's probably some other people like me on the call, I'm familiar with this, but I can't quite place it. What is it, and can we do a disc assessment for free, or do we have to buy the book or buy the module? How do we go about looking that up?
So I would start by sending me an email and saying, Erich, I want to talk about disc.
Okay.
That's as good a starting point as any. I will, people who know me know that I will clear my calendar, clear my schedule for anybody who wants to talk about disc. Needs vary. You may want to learn more about it for yourself in your job search. You may have a team that would benefit from learning about their communication style. So rather than just sort of randomly pointing you in a different direction, I'd love to know more about what your needs are. And honestly, I just love talking about it. So it's kind of selfish of me, but I just want to get you on the phone or on Zoom and talk about it.
Awesome. And I'm gonna drop your LinkedIn up on screen right now as well. Are you open to connecting with people on LinkedIn, Erich? Are you
always
open to certain people, and then I would imagine you like it when people include a personal note in their invitation too, right?
Absolutely. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but I am soaking up everything that I can from Brenda Meller and Meller Marketing, and I'm trying to incorporate those tips and enhancements into what I do on LinkedIn. And so yes, I very much want to connect there, and I would love some context when you reach out to me. Say, I heard you on this conversation with Brenda Meller. That is a great starting point for our meaningful online, for the time being, online relationship.
Awesome. And guys, check out his LinkedIn headline too. This is like when Tina Marie introduced us, what I do is I immediately look people up on LinkedIn, and then I kind of get a quick assessment of is this somebody I want to connect with? It'd be a good conversation. And look at his headline: HR advocate, disc nerd, connection coach. I was like, the disc nerd, it was just like that, popped at me. I'm like, that's cool. When you can kind of own something and say you're so passionate and knowledgeable and deep in that subject that you can call yourself a nerd and really own that. I was like, that's really cool. It's a really cool thing.
You've recommended making better use of your LinkedIn real estate. And so below that, I'm not sure what the section is, but in sort of my introduction space, I go into something a little bit different, the about section. I really use that space for something unique. And, from what I've learned from you along the way, you've reinforced the value of really being intentional about how you use that space. And so I thank you for inspiring me to look at my LinkedIn profile and how I use LinkedIn as a platform a little bit differently.
Well, awesome. Well, it's an honor to get this conversation, to have this conversation here today, both as a fellow introvert, but I just love your energy, and I love the work that you're doing, and I've learned a lot having conversations with you, and we've had really a lot of great interactions here online today. So I know our viewers have enjoyed the conversation as well, Erich. So what's on the agenda for the rest of the day? So are you going on the couch? You're going to sit outside? What's the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes looking like for you right now?
Yeah, I'm going to go sit on the balcony for a couple of minutes, get a sense of how warm it is out there, and just and re-energize a little bit before coming back to my computer, as many of us are doing these days, planning some additional things that are happening going forward. But if you don't mind, I'd love to leave your audience with a thought that inspired me. And that really is just to be genuinely curious, regardless if you're introverted, extroverted, you want the spotlight, you want to avoid the spotlight. I went and reconnected with a good friend of mine, Tom, recently, and sat down, and his daughter, Scarlett, came out, was telling me about the plants she was growing, and she's just this cute little girl, came out, was telling me all about these things she was excited about. She paused for a moment, she looked at me in the eyes, and she said, "How are you doing?" And I was just blown away. And I actually asked his permission to tell this story, because that told me more about meaningful connection than anything else that I could have experienced that day.
How old is she? How old was she when that happened?
Oh my gosh, I should know this, but I mean, she's got to be at least 8 or 9 at this point.
So this, I mean, she's pretty young when this conversation, you know.
Yes, she is. And I need to know exactly how old she is, and I do know, I have it in my notes.
That's okay. I'm just thinking it sounds like a very mature question. It's something that I wouldn't even say, and I've got a 9-year-old and a teen. I don't know that my teen son would ask that question of somebody he met. Like, I think it's like once we get older, 20s, 30s, then we're not always thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about other people. Like, it's a very mature question.
I was entirely surprised, and I so admired her for asking it. And I went back to Tom and I said, do you teach her this? Like, did you tell her to ask that question? He said, no, she's just naturally curious. And if we as adults can be genuinely curious about other people, really want to get to know them in a meaningful, lasting way, our relationships, regardless of our personality style, are going to change for the better. And that really has stuck with me ever since. How are you?
No, that's a great question. And even like when you connect with people on LinkedIn, you know, sometimes it's like we're all selling back and forth, but it's like when you get a person who's obviously taken the time to read through my profile and they comment on something, and I have like my about statement, I've got like, tell me your favorite pie in your invitation to connect. Like, it has nothing to do with my business, but I love pie. And sometimes people will say, I love apple pie, and somebody today was like, I love these kinds of pies, and I love chicken pot pie. And I was like, immediately I was like, we started kind of, you know, talking back and forth, and it was like, it showed that they were actually kind of pausing and being thoughtful. And I think that's kind of the point you're making there too.
We'll get to the business, we'll get to whatever is on our agenda, but if I show up wanting to know who you are, why you do what you do, really get to know you as a person, it's going to make our relationship for the better.
Awesome. Well, such a great conversation here today. Eric, thank you so much for your time and for being on the show. I really enjoyed the chat with you. Of
course. Thanks for having me, Brenda.
All right. So guys, if you happen to be watching this later on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, wherever it's at, please still leave a comment below, because I'm going to share the links with Eric for each of the playback videos. And that way he can still respond back to you. But I also want to encourage you to share this video with someone on your network. So as soon as you're done watching it, go back on the video and click on that share button, because you might reach someone in your network who is an introvert, who maybe is struggling with this whole world of virtual networking and looking for some tips and some support and resources. And you never know who that message can reach. And I also want to encourage you to go to mellermarketing.com, subscribe, and you can be notified of my upcoming LinkedIn Live interview and social media pie series. So that's it for me, Eric. I think I'm going to go, like I said, grab my lemonade, go sit on the deck for a little while and recharge, and we'll go the rest of the day afterwards.
Good to me. Have a great afternoon.
All right, you too, guys. Stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll see you online live again later on this week. Take care.